Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Ruben with Run Wild Powersports, and today I'm bringing you a new kit that we have hitting the market both on our website, our eBay store, and more platforms in the future relating to the cooling system on the Honda Pioneer. So, before we specifically talk about the Honda Pioneer, I want to go over some basics of the cooling system in this machine. So, I'm leaving out some things like the radiator fan and the water pump, some of the other parts that we'll talk about later. But in relation to the Honda Pioneer, we have the radiator, a coolant line going through the thermostat to the engine, a coolant line out of the engine back to the radiator. And this is the cooling system that we have right here in the Honda Pioneer. Now, specifically on the Honda Pioneer, there's a couple problems that we start to see. At sea level, this seems to work pretty well, but as you start to get up in different climates and different elevations above sea level, we start to see a little bit of a breakdown on some people's machines. And that's one of the aims of this kit, is to resolve some of those issues. Specifically, one of the issues is flash boil. And so the OEM thermostat that sits in the vehicle opens and closes at a certain temperature, 180 degrees. And what sometimes happens is that by the time that this thermostat opens, the engine is already in a superheated position to where it's sitting at, I'm making up a number, 250, 260 degrees. And when this thermostat opens, when the coolant hits the engine, it immediately turns into gas because the temperature that the engine is in is above the boiling point of water or even the coolant that is in there. And so it immediately turns to gas and then lowers the cooling efficiency. There is no cooling efficiency of the gas that's now in the engine. So this coolant starts to turn into gas. The engine gets hot. It gets hotter and hotter and hotter. And it's very difficult to bring that back down to normal operating temperature. So again, this kit is something that we've tested with machines all around the United States and even up into Canada, and have seen great success with this system. Now, I will say this isn't the end all be all. There are other contributing factors, the water pump, the radiator, that have an effect on the cooling system. This is just a very small piece, and there's nothing revolutionary about this kit. As I go through and I explain it to you, this isn't intellectual property of Run Wild Powersport. This isn't something that you can't go and piece together on your own. This is just a quick, simple, easy kit that we put together for the Honda Pioneer people just to get and put on their machine. And this is something that I would suggest everybody doing right at the beginning. It's something that gives a marginal increase over the stock machine, even if you've never seen these overheating issues. So another couple pieces that are important to take note of: it's pretty universally agreed on that an engine block temperature is most optimal at 220 degrees. That's not the coolant temperature, that's the engine block temperature. So at 220 degrees, you're going to get the most longevity, the most efficiency out of a motor. And so keep that in mind as we go through and we talk a little bit more. The other thing is the time inside of the radiator. So this coolant passes through the radiator. We've seen issues where people have removed thermostats or gone with too high flow of a thermostat to where the coolant is not in the radiator long enough to provide sufficient time to cool to get to then go into the engine. So it's very important that that time in the radiator stays as close to stock as possible, because that's a very important piece of the whole cooling system. So let's dig into the specifics of this kit. So the very first thing we will talk about is the radiator cap. So right here, this is the radiator cap that comes with the kit. Okay, so the stock radiator cap is a 16 psi radiator cap. This cap right here with this spring is a 20 psi radiator cap. So what does that mean? So the boiling point of water, if you just got some water out and you put it in a pan and you started to boil it, is 212 degrees. So if this engine block is 212 degrees or higher, when water, just plain water, hits it, we're not discussing a radiator cap thermostat, when it hits it, it would turn into gas. So let's start with that 212 degree boiling point. The stock radiator cap is around 16 psi. Each psi that the radiator cap gives, that's pressure inside of the system, raises the boiling point roughly 3 degrees, okay, 2 to 3 degrees. So the stock radiator cap is going to raise it about 48 degrees to 260 degrees. So your engine would have to be at 260 degrees or higher to have a flash boil situation. With our 20 psi radiator cap, you're going to see an increase of 12 degrees. So nothing too crazy, but it's going to bring this up to 272 degree boiling point for the water that is in the cooling system. You really can't go higher than that, because what the problem that you're going to run into is as you're putting pressure on the cooling system, these galleys that are going through the engine include the head gasket on the motor. And if you are at too high of a pressure on your radiator cap and you're at too high of an elevation with your machine up in the mountains, you could blow your head gasket. So again, we've tested different ones around. 20 psi is pretty conservative to where people can go to the elevations they need, but get that marginal increase in a boiling point of the water inside of the engine. And so that's the first part, is the radiator cap. The second part is our thermostat. So this thermostat opens at an OEM temperature of 180 degrees. In our opinion, lowering that temperature to 170, 160, 150, or even removing it altogether is not advantageous. That is something that could be potentially dangerous to your motor. And the reason why is because this thermostat has been designed to be 180 degrees opening, because that is where this 220-degree engine is most optimal at. 180-degree thermostat is what keeps it inside of that window. So a lot of times what we're seeing an issue with is the temperature of this coolant, having the spikes and valleys, right? So it goes up, then maybe you're riding easy and it's going up and down. And we're trying to keep it somewhere around here. So the idea with a lower temperature thermostat is that thermostat opens, say, down here. So it doesn't change these spikes and valleys. It's just hoping that the spikes and valleys are lower. Okay. And so it's a good idea. It makes sense on paper, but again, you could run into a situation where this 170-degree thermostat is not allowing enough time in the radiator. And on top of that, typically the 170-degree thermostats are high flow, so they're not allowing enough time in the radiator. And it creates a situation where that thermostat may open and close, open and close, open and close too much, because again, this cooling system is designed for 180 degrees. When you start changing that temperature of the opening of this coolant system, you inevitably are going to start to run into some issues. So we like the fact that this thermostat is still 180 degrees, and it has some slight modifications to where if there is a situation of the engine is starting to get too hot and there's gas in the system, there's a hole here that allows that gas to escape out of the system easier than the stock one does. So that's the difference on the thermostat that we have. The third part and the final part that's really a modification to the system that we have is water wetter. So water wetter is something that has been around a long time. It's something that's from the automotive industry that I've used on my machines and I've used on all of my vehicles, and comes in our kit. The idea of water wetter is that it lowers the surface tension of water. And so simply put, what it means is, ignore my terrible drawing, but I have a fire here and I have let's call it a metal skillet. So regular water, if you were to drop it down, it goes in drops, right? So I have pictures of drops. When you add water wetter, the reason why it's staying in a drop is the surface tension of the water is holding that water molecule together. Wetter works at the molecular level to change the surface tension of water to allow it to become slimy, basically, to allow it to fall and to form better to the surface of whatever it's on. So when water wetter is put into a cooling system, it increases the ability for the coolant that's in the system to cool your motor, because on a molecular level, it's changing that coolant to be more slimy and get along more surfaces. So as it goes through the engine, it's going to get into those pockets. It's going to get into areas that are a little more difficult for water to cool. It'll change the molecular compounds of that water to allow it to cool better. And so instead of seeing a lot of these spikes, you'll start to see a more consistent engine temperature. So you'll start to see a more consistent engine temperature with something like water wetter, and it will cool better. So if there is a spike of, say, again, I'm making up numbers and I'm making up times, but for the sake of an example, if there is a spike in the temperature to 230 degrees. The stock cooling system may need 30 seconds to get back down to 220 degrees, where water wetter would need 15 seconds. Again, I'm just giving examples. That's not an official scientific example. But what water wetter does is it lowers the surface tension of the water, which allows the coolant to stay at an even-ish temperature. There's going to be still spikes and valleys, but it's going to keep that temperature pretty consistent. And then in the event that there's spikes, it's going to bring that spike down rapidly and quickly. And then we have just a bottle of OEM coolant that comes in our kit. And the reason for that is because when you do change this thermostat, you are going to lose some coolant. So putting in this aftermarket thermostat, you're going to lose some coolant, and you're going to need to burp the system in order to install all of this stuff. And so it comes with this. So again, there's nothing revolutionary about our kit. It's just a few small tweaks that we've seen have had real improvements in real life situations where customers were overheating. They were having the issues on even new machines that the dealer couldn't resolve. Put in these 4 products, really 3 products, and then the top off of the OEM coolant, and the problems go away. Now, again, there are more things that I would suggest. If you're having issues with your radiator fan, I would look at making sure that's optimal and possibly upgraded. With relation to your water pump, making sure that it's passing through fluid, that there's pressure in the system through with that water pump. That's very important. And then the number one thing is a tune. What a tune does is it changes the air to fuel ratio of the motor, among other things. It really changes the air to fuel ratio of the engine to bring the engine heat down. The engine being at the temperature that is at on a factory machine is relating to emission stuff. And so it really makes a better use of the air to fuel ratio to bring that temperature down. So if you wanted a foolproof plan, getting a tune, getting this system, and then obviously having a functioning cooling system, we haven't seen any issues, and we've had some customers really beat on their products. So I could go on for another 30 minutes. As most of y'all know, I'm a very mouthy person. I love talking about these things. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us on Run Wild Powersports, both on Facebook, on Instagram, or on our website. You can email us at info@runwildpowersports.com. We invite you to take a look at this, and happy trail riding.